My daughter told me to transfer my retirement savings into her name, said it was her inheritance anyway. So I emptied the account, and I spent every last penny traveling the world, places she'll never see on her own. Let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Donald Palmer from Miami. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is David, and I used to believe my purpose was to make sure everyone else had enough. I managed every paycheck, every late night at the job I never loved, every small comfort for the people I called family. I never once took a vacation, never let myself want more than I could give. I was the quiet provider, the man who put everything into the idea that if I did it right, they'd never have to worry. You ever spend decades living for someone else's future? It's a kind of slow death, but you tell yourself it's noble. You tell yourself it's love. And then one day, someone says it out loud, like my daughter did, and the words snap something in you clean through. She said it was her inheritance anyway. That's what she called my retirement savings, the account I never touched except to watch it grow. She said it in a tone that made me realize she didn't even see me anymore, just the sum total of what I'd leave behind. And in that moment, I saw everything I had been to her. Not a father, not a man with a lifetime of bruises and dreams of his own. Just a walking, talking bank account. I smiled at her when she said it, a smile I'm sure looked polite enough to hide the way my hands had started to shake. I said nothing, because I had nothing left to say. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in so close it felt like a weight on my chest. I kept hearing her voice, the way she'd said, "It's mine anyway." Like the years I spent sacrificing myself were a down payment on her entitlement. Like my dreams, my quiet pleasures had been signed away in some invisible contract I never agreed to. I thought about every time she'd asked for help and I'd said yes, because I believed that's what fathers did. I thought about the way she'd never once asked me what I wanted. I wish I could tell you I confronted her the next day, that I stood in my doorway and roared at her for her greed. But I didn't. I just woke up, went through my morning routine. Coffee black as night, a shower that left my skin red from the heat, and sat down at my computer. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, like there was a hole in my chest where the last of my illusions had been. I opened the bank website. I stared at the number there, the final sum of a lifetime spent giving. And then, slowly, deliberately, I transferred it all to an account in my own name. My name alone. The money wasn't hers. It never was. But I realized in that moment, sitting in the cold glow of the computer screen, that I'd been living like it wasn't mine either. Like it was some ghost of my obligation that would never let me rest. So I did the only thing that made sense. I emptied the account. I watched the numbers drop to zero, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel poor. I felt free. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I booked a flight instead. To a place she'd never see on her own, not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. I wanted to see the world with my own eyes, not through hers. I wanted to breathe in the air of a place where no one knew my name, where I could be just a man with a story he didn't owe to anyone. That night, I packed a single suitcase. I left behind the life I'd been living for everyone but me. And I left behind the part of me that thought I needed her permission to spend what I'd earned. You ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something huge and terrifying, and you know the only way forward is to jump? That's what it felt like, closing that laptop and feeling the weight of the decision settle into my bones. But instead of fear, there was a quiet I'd never known. A kind of peace I didn't trust yet, but that felt like a promise of something better. I'm not proud of what I did. I'm not sure if it was right, or if it was just desperate. But I do know that when I walked out of that house for the last time, I didn't look back. And that, I think, is the closest thing to freedom I've ever known. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing to explain that could have made her see. I just walked out with that single suitcase, the one that felt so light compared to the years I'd carried her expectations on my back. At the airport, I kept thinking I'd turn around, that someone would stop me, ask me if I was sure. But no one did. No one even noticed. I think that's what made it real, that I was invisible enough to disappear and no one would even blink. You ever realize how easy it is to slip away when you've already been gone inside for years? That's what I learned in those quiet hours, waiting for my flight to be called. On the plane, I closed my eyes and let the drone of the engines drown out every last echo of her voice. I didn't care where we were going first. Paris, Lisbon, Bangkok, it was all the same to me. It was away from the phone calls I knew she'd make when she saw the empty account, away from the small apartment that had become a prison built from my own sacrifices. I didn't want to hear her call me a thief for taking back what was always mine. I didn't want to hear her heartbreak, real or not, or the way she'd try to turn my absence into another way to control me. I wanted the silence more than I wanted anything else. At first, it felt like a betrayal. Not to her. No, I'd given her everything I had, and she'd made it clear she saw me as nothing more than a wallet with a heartbeat. The betrayal was to myself, to the version of me that believed I was only good if I kept giving. Sitting there in that cramped airplane seat, knees pressed against the seat in front of me, I realized I was done being that man. I didn't know who I'd be next, but I knew I wouldn't be him anymore. The first few days were a blur. I checked into small, clean hotels where no one asked questions. I walked until my feet ached, through cities that smelled of spices and diesel and fresh rain. I watched the sun rise over the Seine, felt the mist on my face as I leaned over the bridges that cut through the city like quiet scars. In those first days, I didn't think about her. I didn't think about the money or what would happen when she realized it was gone. I thought about nothing at all. It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt in my life. But you can't really disappear from yourself, no matter how many miles you put between you and the life you left behind. The nights were the worst. Lying in a bed that smelled of bleach and hotel soap, I'd feel the old fears creeping in, like she was still there somehow, her voice in my ear telling me I'd gone too far. I'd close my eyes and see her face, the way she looked when she called it hers. The way she didn't even flinch when I didn't argue. It was like she'd known I wouldn't fight her, like she'd counted on it. And maybe she was right. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I didn't answer the phone when it rang, didn't check my email. I let the world I'd known fade into static. The silence was terrifying at first, but then it became a kind of sanctuary. No one to explain myself to. No one to apologize to for choosing myself for once. I remember the first time I really felt it. That freedom. I was standing in a crowded market in Marrakesh, the air thick with the scent of saffron and leather and something sweet I couldn't name. I watched the people move around me like a tide, each of them lost in their own small dramas. And I realized no one here knew me. No one here expected me to be anything other than a man passing through. I wasn't a father, or a husband, or a provider. I was just David. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. I bought a small silver ring from a vendor, something cheap but beautiful. I slipped it on my finger like a promise to myself. A reminder that this was mine, this moment, this choice, this life I was finally claiming. I didn't wear it for anyone else. Just me. The days blurred together after that, each one a small act of defiance against the life I'd left. I took trains to nowhere in particular, let the tracks rock me to sleep as the landscape slid by in a blur. I watched the sun sink into oceans she'd never see, let the salt air sting my skin until I felt clean again. I wasn't running anymore, not really. I was vanishing, shedding the skin of the man I'd been, so she couldn't touch it anymore. You ever feel that kind of quiet? The kind that's not empty but full of possibility? That's what I lived in. And in that quiet, I started to see the truth I'd been too scared to face, that I didn't owe her anything. Not my money, not my loyalty, not the pieces of my soul I'd been giving away one careful cut at a time. I didn't owe her my freedom. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't have a plan, not really. Just a map of places I'd never been and the slow, certain knowledge that I'd never let anyone tell me who I was supposed to be again. And that was enough. For the first time in my life, it was enough. I thought the transformation would be something dramatic, like I'd wake up one morning with a new heart in my chest, a man reborn by sheer will alone. But it was slower than that, quieter, almost gentle in its arrival. I didn't even notice it at first, the way you don't notice a wound healing until you realize it doesn't hurt to breathe anymore. Each day I spent on the road, each sunrise in a foreign city, was another inch of scar tissue closing over the places where she'd lived in me. I started small. I let myself sleep in, the way I never had when there was a job to get to, a daughter to impress with my reliability. I learned the language of small pleasures. Strong coffee sipped slowly on a terrace in Lisbon, the weight of a worn paperback in my hands as I sat alone in a park. It wasn't about indulgence or even adventure. It was about choosing for myself, moment by moment. I'd spent so many years making choices for her, for the family I thought I was building. But in those quiet mornings, I realized I'd never really asked myself what I wanted. Not once. You ever notice how your breath changes when you're finally alone? It's like your ribs remember how to move again. I'd stand at the edge of the ocean in places I couldn't pronounce and feel my chest expand like it was the first deep breath I'd ever taken. There was no one to see it, no one to judge the choices I was making. And that, somehow, made it sacred. I kept a small journal, just a battered notebook I picked up in a market in Istanbul. I didn't write about her. I didn't write about the money. I wrote about the light in the afternoons, the way it turned the buildings soft and golden. I wrote about the faces of strangers, the warmth of a shared meal with people who didn't know or care who I used to be. I wrote about the quiet, the way it felt like an embrace. And in those pages, I started to see a man I didn't recognize, Al. A man who wasn't afraid to take up space in his own life. There were moments, though, when the old voices crept back in. Her voice, mostly, sharp as a blade in the back of my mind. She'd always had a way of making me feel like my choices were reckless, like I was selfish for wanting anything that didn't serve her future. Those nights, I'd lie awake with the ceiling fan whirring above me, and I'd wonder if I'd done the wrong thing, if maybe I'd become the villain in her story. But in the quiet that followed those thoughts, I'd remember the weight of her words that day, how she'd said it was hers, how she'd taken everything I'd given and made it about her. And I'd realize, again and again, that there was no peace in going back. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't a vow or a declaration. It was in the small acts of kindness I finally offered myself. A pastry eaten alone in a sunlit square, a long walk with no destination. It was in the way I let myself feel anger, even if there was no one there to see it. Because anger, I realized, wasn't shameful. It was the crack that let the light in. I stopped counting the days since I left. I stopped looking at the bank balance, the number that had once been the sum total of my worth in her eyes. The money was still there, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what it meant, that I had chosen me, that I had chosen to live before I died, not just to exist. I thought about her sometimes, about the way she'd sounded when she said it was hers anyway. I wondered if she'd even noticed I was gone, or if she'd just moved on to the next thing she could claim as her own. But those thoughts didn't hold the same power they once did. They were just ghosts, drifting in the corners of my mind. You ever stand in a place so beautiful it feels like your heart might break open from it? I stood in those places every day. And each time, I felt the same quiet truth rising in me. I wasn't hers to inherit. I was mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't ashamed to claim it. The transformation was slow, but it was steady. And with each small step I took away from the man she thought she owned, I felt closer to the man I was always meant to be. I didn't plan the return. It wasn't a flight home or a reunion or even a final goodbye. It was something quieter, something I felt in my bones like the shift of the tide. I wasn't going back to her, not ever. But I was going back to the parts of myself I'd left behind in that house, in those years of quiet compromise. I realized I didn't need to set foot in her world to reclaim them. I could do it in the hush of a foreign sunrise, in the gentle rituals I made for myself each morning. You ever feel like you've circled back to the beginning, only to find the beginning was never what you thought? That's what it was like for me. I started sending postcards, though not to her. I'd write them to no one, leave them at cafes, or slip them into books I left behind in hostels. Little messages to the man I was becoming, reminders that I'd seen things no one could take from me. The sea was green today, I'd write. Or, I watched a woman dance in a square in Seville, and I thought of all the things we never let ourselves be. It wasn't about the places anymore, though the places were beautiful. It was about the quiet resistance of writing those words, proof that I was still here, still moving forward. The postcards became a kind of prayer, a way to honor the quiet spaces in me that had never had room to breathe. I started to feel something I hadn't in years. A hunger that wasn't about providing or protecting. A hunger for my own life. In the nights when the world outside was a soft blur of lights, I'd sit on the balcony of whatever small room I'd found, and I'd let the memories come. Not the memories of her, but the ones I'd buried even deeper, like the afternoons I used to spend painting in the garage long before she was born, or the way the air smelled in the mountains I'd climbed when I was 20 and sure the world was mine. I didn't call her. I didn't tell her where I was, but I knew she'd find the money trail eventually. I'd left enough of a breadcrumb trail in the form of hotel bookings, plane tickets, small purchases in cities she'd never set foot in. I wasn't hiding. I was just done explaining myself. And I think, in some small way, I wanted her to know that. That I hadn't vanished because I was afraid. I'd vanished because I was done being a hostage to her vision of who I was supposed to be. The calls started eventually. She must have seen the withdrawals, the places where my name cropped up in foreign currencies. Her messages were short, clipped, each word like a slap across the face. Where are you? What did you do? You stole my future. I read them all and didn't answer. Not because I didn't have answers, but because the questions weren't really hers to ask. There was a day in Florence, late spring, when the air smelled like wisteria and warm bread, and I let the phone ring out. I watched the river move slow and heavy beneath the bridges and felt the calm I'd been chasing finally settle into me like an old friend. She could rage all she wanted. I was done carrying it. You ever stand in that kind of stillness, when the world around you is alive, but you're at peace in your own skin for the first time? It's like you've been holding your breath for years and finally remember how to exhale. I didn't need her permission to exist anymore. And the beauty of that realization was a quiet, devastating kind of freedom. The return wasn't about her. It was about me. About standing in the ruins of the life I'd built for someone else and realizing I didn't have to keep building. I could let it all go. And in that letting go, I found something that looked a lot like peace. I wrote in my journal that night, I have nothing left to give her. And that's not cruelty. That's survival. I closed the book and let the words be enough. The confrontation didn't happen in some grand hotel lobby or on a sunlit street in Rome. It was smaller than that, just a phone call, the kind of call you don't want to answer because you know it will change everything. But I answered anyway. I was in a small cafe in Prague, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee and warm bread. My phone buzzed on the table like an accusation, her name lighting up the screen. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring out, letting the silence be my answer. But I didn't. I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. Where are you? Her voice was sharp, but there was something else there too, a note of desperation she probably didn't even hear in herself. I took a slow breath, let the clatter of cups and low hum of voices wash over me. Somewhere you'll never go, I said, my voice calm in a way that felt almost foreign. Somewhere I needed to be. She went quiet for a moment, like she didn't know how to answer that. Then the anger came, rushing back into the space between us. You stole everything, she spat. It was mine. You had no right. I let her words hang in the air, let them settle into the quiet of the cafe. Outside, the sky was pale and soft, and I watched a couple walk by, hand in hand, their laughter easy and private. I thought about how small the world was when you stopped trying to control it. It was never yours, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. It was mine, and I was done waiting for permission to live. You're selfish, she said, her voice cracking. You're cruel. You ruined everything. I closed my eyes, felt the words slide past me like water. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was cruel. But I wasn't hers to define anymore. Maybe I am, I said, but I'm not yours to fix. She went silent again, and in that silence, I felt the weight of all the years we'd spent dancing around each other's needs. All the times I'd let her take until there was nothing left of me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being angry. I was just done. You think this makes you brave? She said finally, her voice trembling. You think running away means you're free? I looked out at the river that ran through the city, the water calm and steady. No, I said. I don't think it makes me brave. I think it makes me honest. She hung up then, the line going dead in my hand. I stared at the screen for a moment, at the blank reflection of my own face. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like I'd just laid down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. And in that quiet that followed, I felt something shift in me, something small but unbreakable. You ever feel the weight lift off your shoulders so slowly you almost don't notice until it's gone? That's what it felt like. Like I could finally stand up straight in my own life. Like I could finally breathe without flinching. I didn't block her number. I didn't erase her from my life. But I didn't answer when she called again. I didn't let her voice fill the quiet I'd earned for myself. I wasn't hers to reclaim. I wasn't hers to judge. And the beauty of that truth was enough to keep me going. In the weeks that followed, I felt the fallout in small ways. The missed calls, the emails she sent that I never opened. But each time I chose silence over engagement, I felt that quiet peace settle deeper into me. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting the small, growing space inside me that she'd never be allowed to invade again. I kept traveling, kept sending those postcards to no one, each one a small declaration that I was still here, still moving forward. I stopped thinking of it as running away. It was never about running. It was about refusing to stand still in a life that had never felt like mine. I know she'll never understand. I know she'll tell herself I'm the villain in her story, but that's not mine to fix or fight. The only story I'm responsible for now is the one I'm living. And that, I think, is the quiet kind of courage that no one can take away. It's funny how endings don't feel like endings when you're in them. They feel like quiet mornings, like the soft rustle of sheets when you wake up alone in a place that doesn't belong to anyone but you. That's what this was for me. Not an ending, but the first breath of a life that felt fully mine. I didn't go back. I didn't even look back. I kept moving forward, one small step at a time, until the past felt like something soft and faded in the rearview mirror. There was a moment in Kyoto, standing in a garden of moss and stone, when I realized I'd stopped waiting for her voice in my head to quiet. It was already gone. All those years of compromise and silent deals I'd made with myself, all the ways I'd let her needs shape the man I became, they'd melted away like morning fog in the sun. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just free. You ever feel that kind of freedom? The kind that doesn't come with applause or recognition, just a slow, deep knowing in your bones? That's what it was like, standing there with the scent of wet earth and old pine all around me. The final twist wasn't some grand confrontation. It wasn't revenge. It was the quiet fact that I no longer cared if she understood. I didn't need her to. I didn't return the calls. I didn't respond to the messages that trickled in even months later. I didn't let the weight of her expectations pull me back into the man she thought she owned. I'd already buried him. In every sunrise in a new city, every breath of air that smelled like possibility instead of obligation, I let that old version of me slip further away. I kept the silver ring I bought in Marrakesh, wore it on my hand like a quiet reminder of the promise I'd made to myself, to choose my own life, no matter how small or messy it might look from the outside. I didn't need the money anymore, not really. I needed the spaces it had bought me, the quiet rooms and far-off beaches where I learned to hear my own heartbeat again. There were nights when the loneliness felt sharp enough to cut, when the world felt too big and I felt too small to hold my place in it. But even in those nights, there was a peace I'd never known before, a peace in knowing I'd chosen this, that I'd finally given myself permission to live for no one but me. I think about her sometimes, the less and less as the months pass. I wonder if she's telling herself I was a thief or a coward, or if she's finally stopped thinking about me at all. But those thoughts are just shadows now, passing through the quiet I've built like birds in flight. They don't land. They don't stay. You ever find yourself in a moment that feels like it was always waiting for you? That's what this is. Not the life I thought I'd have. Not the life I was told to want. Just the life I chose, piece by careful piece, from the wreckage of everything I once thought I had to be. The world is smaller than I ever realized. I've seen more of it in these months than I did in decades of being the man she thought she owned. And every new place feels like a small, deliberate act of rebellion, a quiet way of saying, this is mine. This is for me. I don't know what comes next. Maybe that's the best part. There's no plan, no roadmap. Just a small silver ring and a passport filled with stamps that tell the story of a man who finally stopped living for someone else. I think that's the final gift of this choice. Not the money, not even the places I've seen, but the quiet knowing that I'm enough. that I was always enough, and that the life I'm building, step by careful step, is the only inheritance that ever really mattered. If you felt this story, if you've ever had to fight for your own peace, then stick around. I share stories like this every day about letting go, standing tall, and living on your own terms. Hit subscribe and join me here. See you soon in the next story.